Happy New Year, dear friends. In November 2025, I had the privilege of hosting a podcast conversation with Ms. Veena Kohli, the founder and CEO of Vanguard Diagnostics, as well as the managing director of Diagon-Vanguard Diagnostics India. Given her eloquence, originality of ideas, and the depth of thought, naturally our conversation extended to over 90 minutes. During this engagement, Ms. Kohli articulated her own conceptualized 10 commandments for the IVD industry, a framework that reflects deep insights, experience, and a strong ethical compass for the in vitro diagnostic sector. Subsequently, we at MedDevice decided that, these 10 commandments are so critical and relevant to the sector that it should be presented as a focused standalone video so that this gets the attention that it deserves. And therefore, we didn't embed this into the lengthy conversation which we had and broadcasted it earlier. Instead, now we present this as a 20-minute concise video so that this gets the full attention, as I said, the full attention that it deserves. I wish to draw an analogy here. The complete conversation that I had with Ms. Kohli, out of those 90 minutes, it's like it's full of her rich experience, which is, akin to Mahabharata, vast, detailed, and expansive. And this 20-minute segment, which we call it as the 10 commandments for the IVD industry, is like the Bhagavad Gita, distilled, powerful, timeless essence of that larger wisdom. This encapsulates the core reality that demand reflection, discussion, and action. This video is therefore essential viewing for all the stakeholders, be it the diagnostic industry leaders, policymakers, or the emerging professionals. I strongly encourage you to watch, reflect, and share your thoughts.
See, basically, Sangeet, it's a theme of actionable priorities,
Yeah.
which I feel can take the Indian IVD ecosystem to the next. And I like to call them the 10 commandments for IVD in India.
Yeah. The first commandment is ensure access to clinical samples for IVD research and validation.
Yeah, see, right now, you'd be surprised to know that the Indian IVD companies have no authorized access to clinical samples from pathology labs or hospitals.
Yeah.
And these clinical samples are required for developing innovative diagnostics tools. And they are also required for making in-house quality control panels, for testing of the products batch after batch and to maintain the consistency throughout. See, right now, globally, there are just a handful of quality control panel suppliers, and they are prohibitively expensive and therefore inaccessible. So, what we need to do is to create, the government needs to do this, to create clear protocols and guidelines which will allow an ethical, controlled issuance of clinical samples in an anonymous manner to the industry so that they can do R&D, they can do quality control. And I'd like to share with you, it's something that I worked on for 2 years while I was president at ADMI. On the 5th of March 2021, NBTC, the National Blood Transfusion Council, they issued a notification to all blood banks saying that all the blood banks that are found to be positive for HIV, HBsAg, or HCV, and which would otherwise be destroyed by the blood banks, should be issued to manufacturers of the kits of HIV, HBsAg, HCV to serve as critical raw materials for making positive controls for ELISA, chemiluminescence, and rapid cardiac. And it took a lot of effort to get this critical permission released. And what was garbage for the blood banks became gold for the industry. And the current ask that we have about, giving permission to take clinical samples from hospitals and path labs, it's just an extension of this permission that was granted to us by NBTC 4.5 years ago. So I always say that this is the lowest hanging fruit and the sweetest of them all, so the government must give it to us.
Second of the 10 commandments is ensure access to contemporary technology by unlocking innovation locally.
Yeah, see, there's a wide gap between the level of technology that is available in India and which is available in the developed parts of the world. That's why even till today, products that are based on advanced technologies are imported by our country. But we don't want to remain import dependent all the time. But what do? Where do we get this technology from? Because no Western or developed country is willing to transfer the technology of a promising and thriving product. Why would they do that? They are ready to talk about a technology transfer of an obsolete product and technology, and that too at very high prices. So that's not a win-win situation, and therefore it's not sustainable. And I always say that there's a treasure trove of technologies locked in the labs of the premier academic institutions of our country. My alma mater, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, NII, CSIR, CCMB, IITs, so on and so forth. But that knowledge and that know-how rarely reaches the industry. The pathway from the lab to the market is broken. So what we need to do is to harness this strength that we have. We have a very good academic ecosystem in the country, and this can be done through industry-academia collaborations. And DBT and BIRAC demonstrated to us during the pandemic times that industry-academia collaborations can do wonders. And all we need to do is not to make these collaborations just wartime exceptions and to try and make them routine. And then we will be able to unlock the innovation and technology locally.
Right. Okay, so the third point is local availability of critical raw materials for IVD research and manufacturing.
Yeah, see, what we call as domestic products, reagents especially, they also have a component of imported items, which are like monoclonal antibodies, antigens, enzymes, primers, probes. I will be surprised to know that in the year 2024 itself, the import value of these so-called critical raw materials touched rupees 2,166 crores. 80% of it was constituted by monoclonal antibodies and antigens, and 15% by enzymes, and the remaining by the rest of the thymus probes and others. And it requires an extensive and advanced and huge infrastructure to make these products by any company. You need a hybridoma facility, you would need an animal house, full system for protein biosynthesis, protein purification, fermentation, and so on. So it's not practically possible for every company to have its own in-house infrastructure to do this. And the good news is that India has the know-how of making these raw materials locally. And these are required both for IVD research and life sciences research and manufacturing in IVD. So I think the DOP needs to step in to incentivize this sector and facilitate the setting up of small, centralized, shared facilities that will make these critical raw materials and make them affordable and available to the Indian IVD industry as well as the life sciences industry.
Okay, so the next is correction of the inverted duty structures for IVD instruments.
Yeah, see, this has been a long ask of the industry for IVD instruments. At this point in time, a finished instrument of IVD can be imported at 0% basic custom duty. Whereas the spare parts and components that are required for making the instrument here attract a custom duty between 7.5 to 15%. So this structure actually incentivizes imports and it punishes manufacturing. No wonder we are more than 80% import dependent in case of IVD instruments. So what we've been proposing at ADMI and at whichever forum I get an opportunity is that the import duty on finished instruments should be increased to 15% in a phasic manner.
Yeah.
And the import duty on spare parts and components should be reduced to 2.5%. And this will give a nudge to the local manufacturers to, start investing in the development and manufacturing of IVD instruments, which will ultimately reduce the import dependence in this sector.
Okay, the next one is incentivizing R&D to foster innovation.
I see there are several barriers in to building a robust and thriving R&D and innovation ecosystem for the Indian diagnostic space. And that's because there is very low investment in R&D by the IVD companies themselves, the government of India, and even private investors. If we look at globally, the IVD companies in the developed parts of the world invest 6 to 8% of their revenues into R&D.
Right.
Chinese IVD companies invest a staggering 11 to 14% in R&D, and IVD companies in India invest between 0 to 2% of their revenues into R&D, and we all can see the results. And there are two reasons for that, I would say. Number one, that the Indian IVD companies, like I mentioned before, are majorly MSMEs.
Yeah.
And they don't have the resources to really make large investments that are required for doing deep research. And secondly, there are no significant fiscal or non-fiscal incentives being offered by the government of India to invest in R&D. And I brought this point up at the recent India MedTech Expo, when the senior officials for DOP and the CDSCO were also present. I said that we must reintroduce the weighted tax deduction of 200% against expenditure in R&D. This benefit was available to us till a few years back, and now it has been reduced to 100%. So that's quite demotivating, that we don't even get benefit of tax if we invest in R&D. And China continues to offer this scheme for their IVD tech and manufacturing companies. And I also suggested that the government of India should assign a pioneer status to innovative products in the form of tax exemption on the sale of that product for a period of 5 years maybe, and then maybe give it a fast route for regulatory approval so that the time to market for the innovator is reduced. Like you have the green channels for innovative products in China, and you have the breakthrough medical device program in the US, where the regulatory pathway is shorter, faster, clearer for the innovator.
All right. So the next one is create demand for indigenous IVD products under the purview of the revised PPO.
Yeah, we were just talking about this, that the revised PPO did lay the foundation for 135 parameters, and now that number can go up, the number of manufacturers that have increased, and maybe new products are being developed, and we can increase this list.
Yeah. All right. The next one is make IVD tools available to underserved rural areas under NEDL.
Yeah, see, 70% of the Indian population lives in rural areas, and the diagnostics infrastructure is quite urban-centric.
Yeah.
So we have to bridge this gap, and that can be done by the implementation of the National Essential Diagnostics List.
Yeah.
And India was the first country to develop its own National Essential Diagnostics List, and the idea of making this list was to make diagnostics an integral part of the healthcare system and to strengthen the healthcare system at the grassroots level. It described what type of tests, diagnostics tests should be available at the sub-centers or the primary healthcare centers or community centers and district hospitals and so on. A lot of hard work has gone into making the NEDL, WHO, ICMR, and the industry were involved, and I feel proud that I was a part of the stakeholders committee, and I also contributed best that I could to the making of the NEDL. And this was prepared in 2019. And now I hear that ICMR has introduced a revised version of the NEDL in 2025. And if it gets implemented, it could be another watershed moment for the industry, because a majority of the products or parameters that are mentioned in the NEDL can be locally manufactured by the Indian IVD companies.
Right. Wonderful. All right, the next is integrate specific skill development for diagnostics in our academic curricula. Oh, I think it's very important.
Yeah, see, we've been hearing of D Pharma and B Pharma and M Pharma being offered by many of the leading colleges of pharmacy in the country. And I think this long-term focus has helped India emerge as the pharmacy of the world.
Yeah.
And we need the same focus and the same effort behind diagnostics now to be able to repeat the pharma success story.
So any specific suggestions that you can put forth on this?
Yeah, I would say AMTZ is already doing some work on that, and they have introduced an MBA in MedTech. But I think we should have an undergrad and a postgrad course in diagnostics, wherein it should cover the basics of healthcare first. Maybe I'm biased because I did my human biology curriculum and we studied anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, pathology, microbiology, along with the MBBS students for the first year. And they could have a similar foundation to begin with in the first year, and then they could be given training on the subject of their choice, which could either be R&D in diagnostics for designing assays, or quality, manufacturing, upscaling. Like the M-Pharm courses cover everything. And people who come out of M-Pharm, and there were so many of them at Ranbaxy, were all equipped to take on any aspect of the pharma industry. And we could do the same for diagnostics. At least an undergrad and a post-graduation course. Right now, we only have a DMLT, which is enough to train a technician to work in a path lab. Yeah. But it is not enough to create world-class scientists and developers and manufacturers and quality establishing professionals.
It's amazing, 70% of all the healthcare decisions are based on diagnostic tests.
Yes.
And we don't have a higher education system for diagnostics.
Yeah, it is very much required. I think people are taking note of it, and more so after the COVID-19 pandemic. Because earlier, sorry to say, India could only see pharma,
Yeah.
Of course, and pharma has done very well.
Sure.
But like I'm saying, COVID-19 pandemic put diagnostics at the center stage for the first time. And we proved our worth during that period.
True.
The first call of duty was on diagnostics. Yes. We had to first detect the infection accurately before triaging could be done, whether to do isolation or to start therapy or hospitalization, oxygen therapy and ventilators and so on. But the first step was to detect correctly. And I think the industry did a wonderful job. And that we had achieved 100% self-reliance in the detection of COVID-19 in the country.
Yes.
By May 2021, that's mentioned in the report that I submitted to the Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, was that India had a collective manufacturing capacity to produce 2 crore tests for the detection of COVID-19. So not only were we absolutely 100% self-reliant, we had surplus to export too, which many companies did.
Yes.
So I think after having proven our worth, everyone's beginning to take notice, and they will respond to the unmet needs that we have in the industry. And I'm very hopeful that we will be able to repeat the pharma success story.
Right. All right. So the next regulatory reforms for time-bound permissions and ease of doing business.
Yeah, this is very important. Time-bound permissions. We need to have a clear pathway for regulatory approvals. Time-bound pathway. That if you are applying for a license, within 30 days you will get it, and no further than that. And this is for the routine products. And like I was saying, for the innovative products, we must have a time-bound mechanism for approval of diagnostics products that don't have a predicate device. Right now, we are struggling to validate our new products, whereas they should be given priority so that India is able to launch new innovative products that could be useful to the world.
Yeah. I mean, that takes me to the last of your 10 commandments, that's building the brand. Build the brand for the domestic products.
Yeah, see, people do have a preference for imported products. Of course, Make in India label is no more a taboo, but there are still preferences. So we have to improve the perception and acceptance of locally manufactured products. I mean, leading pack lab chains of the country should be proudly using products made in India. And we need to work on that first at the local level on the tenets of quality, affordability, and accessibility. And then in due course of time at the global level on the tenets of innovation, scale, and reasonable pricing.
Absolutely. I mean, do you still feel that there is a gap in terms of quality standards between the best of Indian products compared to the global products?
Not anymore.
Not
anymore. I've been in the industry for almost 4 decades, and I've seen the transition over this period. I think at this point in time, our quality standards and our action quality of the products is absolutely at par with any good Western company.
It's great to hear, very encouraging to hear. And in fact, thank you for this 10 commandments. It's a real eye-opener. I hope you found this video thought-provoking and informative. Thank you for watching, and please do share your thoughts and reflections in the comment box. Until I meet you again with yet another guest, goodbye.